everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, Living Landscapes from the Center of Community and Environmental Design. My name is Ishraq. I'm a PhD student in Landscape Systems and Design at Purdue. And with me is Amelia. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Amelia Gonzalez. I'm an undergrad student at Purdue as well, studying landscape architecture.
Cool. Thanks for joining me, Amelia. Today we're going to talk about, in our podcast, we talk about community and environmental design, and we think that there are so many different applications of what community and environmental is. So,
yeah, today we're going to talk about agricultural landscapes. It's not, we have a lot of urban design and suburban design, but no one really designs agricultural landscapes with much detail.
Yeah.
Even though they produce a lot of food, they take up like a lot of land. I think they take up like 40% of the world's land. They produce a lot of our food. They take up a lot of jobs. So they're very important.
Yeah. Not just like food, but also other stuff such as ecosystem services, such as fibers.
Exactly.
Even like fuel and feed for our animals.
And animal products, eggs, dairy.
Yeah.
Most production starts somewhere at agricultural land. And it's a bit of an oversight that people don't usually design them, which as intensely as we do urban landscapes, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're trying here in our lab to think about what does it mean to design agricultural landscapes and how can we approach it. We still don't have answers, but we're trying to explore here together. So welcome to this exploration.
Yay!
Okay. So, Amelia, why do we need to design agricultural landscapes, in your opinion?
Agricultural landscapes have a lot of unique challenges. They're very full of unique systems. They have a lot of machinery that is involved, a lot of animals, if it's an animal livestock farm, the buildings, the storage. It takes up huge swaths of land. Obviously, we've said like 40% of the world.
Yeah.
And it's a big balance between the land and production efficiency. A lot of agricultural lands end up damaging the environment around them.
Yeah, so like we can say that there are some challenges related to the production itself. So the agricultural systems need a lot of input, such as fertilizers and pesticides, etc. But these inputs first are very expensive, not in terms of the cost, but also in terms of their environmental effect on our planet. So also, there are other challenges such as social economic challenges, like farms are being consolidated, they're being merged into larger farms, and some farmers are being kicked out of their farms just because like they can't afford the system anymore. There are also other challenges such as like when small farms disappear, then local communities in rural areas are also disappearing, which means that schools will no longer be available in these areas, and the few people that remain in that area have no access to schools. So like they need to travel for 3 hours maybe every day in the morning and every day in the evening to get to school and back home for the kids.
Yeah, it's very much of a positive feedback loop situation where because our world needs so much production, the cost of it is getting a lot higher. Self-sufficient farming isn't quite as self-sufficient as it used to be. Small mom and pop farms are getting bought up by large industry farms, which, like you said, degrades not only the rural community, but also the environmental community else around it.
Yeah.
So if these farms were designed with a bit more intention and balance, you could really help not only these rural communities, but also the career farmers whom their forefathers have been farming before them.
Yeah, and also one more thing, like you just talked about, like environmental issues. For example, if we are expanding our cultivation, like on new areas, we are actually degrading the ecosystems that other living entities are living in. So, for example, if we expand one more acre of land into corn or whatever kind of farming, then some creatures will be lost, or like at least they will lose their habitat, and that's not really good because not just for these creatures themselves, but also agricultural system and also like the whole planet.
They rely on these wildlife systems. You need pollinators for the farms to grow.
Yeah.
That isn't going to happen if these key species get wiped out because of loss of habitat.
Yeah.
And as like the world in general is having these climate change issues, keeping our fertile land like farmable is really important.
Yeah, especially because human population is also increasing. So we need actually to feed more people. So we need either to expand our more land into cultivation, which is not really good.
Yeah, because we also need that room for housing.
Yeah, but also
or habitat.
Yeah, ecosystem services and other stuff. The other option is to rethink the current existing farming systems, which is what we are trying to do.
Yeah, of course. So all these challenges are like really scary and big and world important, but they just offer a lot of design challenges. Landscape architects just think of everything as design challenges, and you can have some really efficient and cool designs come out of it.
Yeah. And we think that while this is not really talked about in design education or in design discussions in general, other people actually discussed this thing or even implemented different kinds of alternative farming practices and alternative agricultural landscape solutions. So, for example, there is so much experimentation with silvopasture, with perennial grasses, also rotational grazing, and then there are like agroforestry and other, like a very wide variety of different systems.
Yes.
Yeah, which is great. These solutions are very important. However, we think that we need to make them more widely adopted, and also we need to think about other aspects, not just the cultivation part of it, but also the economic and the social aspects. And also we need to think beyond the farm scale to expand our discussion to the regional scale and even beyond. So like how two farms can work together to think about each of the farms, but also the area in between the farms. How can a whole county think about different kinds of cultivations within the county? So maybe based on understanding the soil and hydrology and other aspects, we can decide that, oh, maybe this part of the county should be cultivated in this kind of certain crop.
Yes.
And in that area, maybe like we don't have good soil, so maybe we can think about placing some solar panels.
It's the idea of bringing landscape architects into designing these agricultural lands isn't to say that farmers and agronomists and foresters aren't doing their job well.
Yeah.
They do their job well. They know what they're talking about. The idea of, like you're saying, Ishraq, like a master plan for the county, a master plan for this town, and connecting all these individual scientists and experts working in their own land together to bring maybe this land isn't as fertile, so we're going to have livestock centered here, but maybe we'll have the livestock, like you said, rotate on all these farms when they're in their off years, regenerating the soil instead of, and that might help the large amount of land needed too, instead of having each farm work independently. Bringing those together in a way that is a bit more meshy is where landscape architects would come in, because we work with experts in their fields all the time and taking the expertise from these farmers and what they know of their land and bringing it together.
Yeah, and also taking the expertise from agronomists, from environmental scientists, from social scientists, and even economists. And like, how can we rethink the whole thing?
Experts that usually aren't in the conversation, for sure. It's not about replacing anybody. It's about bringing everyone together where they usually might not be talking to each other.
Yeah. And again, because like we are landscape architects, we see this as a whole system approach or like systems thinking approach. And again, we're not saying that we will solve all these issues, but we will try to offer some solutions that might be practical. And I think our role is actually to move all these like different kinds of knowledge, such as, let's say, if an agronomist say that this kind of soil needs this kind of crop, most of the time, this discussion will remain in a paper that is published in a like highly cited, reviewed journal, but the farmers will not really know like that this is a good recommendation for their land.
Because who's trying to read academic papers in their free time?
Only PhD students. But our role as designers is like we can bring this science into practice and suggest to the farmer that here you go. Maybe you can plant this crop in this part of your farm if you want to have maybe better soil, or maybe
you've been struggling trying to grow this one. Let's try this one instead. You might not know what grows well here now. Landscape architects they're trained in this language of like holistic viewing and working with people and doing like consulting in a way with design. But we're not taught about agriculture in our training. We don't talk about that in my classes at all. We're talking about Italian villas and urban plazas and public parks, but rural areas could really use a landscape architect's holistic approach, I feel.
Because like we're landscape architects, I think one of the things we always talk about is what are the different elements or components that we can organize and bring together and think of them as a whole. So, Amelia, can you think about some parts of the agricultural landscapes that we might consider when we design them?
Yeah, for sure. Some common kit of parts that usually happen are like pedestrian and vehicular areas. That still carries over to agricultural land. You need tractors, need roads on, and tractors need roads to traverse the land, and humans need separate roads because they're things. But also you have the crops, what they need, the livestock, what they need, storage for both of those production areas. Yep. Then there's that environmental aspect too. You have that kind of kit of parts of like environmental buffers, wind screens, soil, maybe habitat areas to offset the effect if we're thinking in a really sustainable aspect, for sure.
Yeah, so you're talking about some parts that are related to environmental aspects or environmental needs, and parts that are related to agricultural needs, and parts that are related to human needs. All these pieces, if we can bring them together. So if we bring, as you say, a buffer, and then also different kinds of crops, and also we can think about the soil as a whole, then once we start this process of thinking about everything together, then maybe this is what we mean by design in agricultural landscapes.
Yeah, for sure. There's a way to think of like an area as separate farms. If there's 3 smaller farms, maybe a larger farm with multiple different plots of land, and maybe those 3 smaller farms need like a house and a backyard and a parking lot and maybe a pool along with the agricultural things, but the larger farm doesn't. They just need a parking lot with their main building. There's definitely a way to set those farms up to work internally while still thinking of a kit of parts for the whole area and bringing them together in a way that makes sense.
So speaking of the whole area, maybe a whole area that is cultivating different kinds of veggies, maybe you need cold storage for storing these veggies. So like instead of placing one cold storage in every single farm.
Yes, exactly.
How about thinking about centralized storage for all these farms to work together?
Yeah, if a more industrial farm has a lot of vehicle storage, maybe there's a way for the smaller farms to store their vehicles in that area too, instead of having different tractor garages on each plot of land. Maybe there's a way for the smaller cow farmer to rotate on some of the fields to replenish the soil faster. Things like that. You can definitely work all the little parts together to make a beautiful puzzle.
And like now, all these things that you're talking about, Amelia, are like, I can think about them as design problems. So what are some of the design problems that we can consider in agricultural areas? And of course, there are many, but we can keep it short.
Not to talk for 2 hours. Definitely the first one is obviously space. You can definitely make them more efficient of a spatial setup that makes sense for not only the farmer, but also the crops and the livestock.
So you're talking about the layout and the spatial configuration and arrangement of different elements within the farm and also across different farms?
For sure. It's like a university campus where there's going to be a lot of internal small areas. You need to make sure, the horticulture building has a small greenhouse next to it, but also make sure that the horticulture building makes sense within the larger aspect of the campus. You can make sure that this farm works internally and the crops rotate and the irrigation makes sense for that. But then the irrigation might also make sense for the farm next to it. Maybe they share that. Or the more pollinated crop is downwind from the one up. More pollinators come there, whatever.
So like you're talking about placing different elements or different parts of the kit of parts. Exactly. Different parts of within the farm and also across different farms. So which crop goes, where does the building go, where does the pollinator habitat go?
Maybe we center them around a pollinator habitat to maximize the pollinator. Maybe we'll have a lot of environmental buffers that work through all of them to help filtrate the water from the pesticides and fertilizers mentioned earlier without having to set up individual environmental buffers on each and every farm.
So it's basically like the first design problem is what to place where, or what we call it spatial configuration or layouting different elements within and across the farm.
Which landscape architects do all the time.
Of course.
Bricks and everything, for sure. So it works.
And speaking of one farm and different farms, I'm also thinking about access. So how can the tractors get to each of the farm, and how can also like the farmer get to the farm, and then if we are moving a huge amount of produce or like crop from the farm, then we need a truck or something to take the produce. So there are so many machineries and also livestock.
You're going to need like pedestrian circulation, vehicular circulation for cars, equipment circulation for tractors, livestock circulation and that's going to be different between like chickens and cows and goats and bison or whatever is on farms. And but again, landscape architects do this often with urban parks, and it's easy. The language is transferable even if we're not usually trained in agriculture.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And one more thing that we can also think about is the landform or the terraform. So maybe like we can create some hilly areas, more slopey areas, or more flat areas, especially if the land is like has deep soil that we can easily shape. If we want, for example, to grow a crop that will produce more yield on a slopey terrain.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, or sometimes we need to create like swamps or like wetlands. So we need to dig some parts of the soil to make this drop in the elevation so we can collect some water for different reasons.
Yeah, grading land is something that civil engineers and urban planners and architects do all the time. And you definitely could do that at agricultural land as well to help with soil erosion, crop drainage. If they need well-drained soil, maybe we put that on a slope. And maybe at the bottom of the slope is crops that want swampy soil.
Yeah.
If it gets a lot of rain, how do we deal with that? Maybe that we put drainage inlets in so that the access water can run to a storage system or some sort. Like in the part of the world, there's a lot of terracing.
Yeah.
So maybe we do terracing. Maybe we don't do terracing.
Yeah.
Maybe the land is flat and nothing needs to be done. It's just part of the kit of parts you were talking about.
Yeah. As you say, different parts of the world need different design solutions. This is exactly what we always do. If we're dealing with an urban design in a coastal area, it's very different than dealing with an urban design with it, like in the middle of the desert.
Desert. The landscape is never designed the same way no matter what. It's not the same as a civil engineer. A well-designed bridge can work mostly anywhere.
Yeah.
But part of the design challenges in kit of parts is that every landscape is going to be unique.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Speaking of like how unique can every landscape be, agricultural landscapes are unique because their main purpose or land use is agriculture. So
yes, that's
a very
true.
important design problem in agricultural areas is the crops. So,
make sure it's a functional farm. You definitely have all these like sustainable ideas, but if it doesn't work as a farm, you have failed the goal.
Yeah.
So you definitely want to make sure that the crops are happy and the cost will balance out if these techniques are going to be used to have a whole county work together, make sure that everyone in that county is buying in on the idea, not because it's a good idea, but because it will benefit them more than the current system.
Yeah, and also we need to make sure that the crops that we are growing make sense in that part of the farm or in the county. And also that we are actually feeding the people who are around. Like instead of thinking about shipping this produce, how about we can think about producing locally to feed the people who are actually here and livestock that are around us.
And that might work a bit better if farms are working together.
Yeah.
Like here in Indiana, you'll drive down the street, it's all soybeans and corn, but it's mostly never human soybeans and corn. It's always for feed.
Yeah.
So if we have livestock farmers locally that work with them, you can maybe make sure all that livestock feed is going to the livestock and then have some other parts that are for people. Sweet corn, soybeans for tofu or whatever, tomatoes and such, instead of shipping it to Michigan or Ohio.
Yeah, exactly. And also instead of buying our veggies from like the southern parts of the South.
California, maybe we can also grow them here.
Yeah, exactly.
And it saves on production.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to harvest them so early that they have to ripen on truck and stuff like that.
Yeah, but also one of the things that landscape architects can think about is seasonality. So like we can't grow tomatoes here in Indiana in February, right? But we can also think about buildings that can produce food, indoor farming, etc. So how can we move beyond and think about different kinds of cultivations, whether it's inside, outside?
Yeah, inside, outside, like other techniques, like you said, maybe there's a technique on the other side of the world that would be applicable in Indiana. Yep. Looking back to the way Native Americans would cultivate food and things. Maybe we use like the buffer, usually like a buffer between agricultural fields. Maybe that's native plants and like a blackberry bush because that's easily also producible.
Yeah, and it's like edible, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So also like we can think about different crops. So maybe we don't really need to just grow tomatoes and like corn and soy and few more crops. Maybe we can be very innovative and borrow, as you said, from other cultures and from other parts of the world about different crops that we can actually cultivate, and they are tasty. And
so we have the head house for the tomatoes to start in February. Yeah. But we also have corn growing with pumpkins because they work together or such.
Yeah, and maybe we can like see if scientists publish something about a kind of orange that will grow in Indiana.
Yeah.
But that's the point, is like we can, as landscape architects, just explore around and see what different scientists brought to the table and try to bring them all together to thinking about the future of the farm and also beyond the farm.
Yeah, the holistic idea of not only the present and the future, but also the past as well, to see what has worked before. People have been growing stuff in Indiana forever, so I'm sure they figured it out.
Yeah. Also, one thing that we can think about is soil and water. So like soil erosion controls. How can we do that through cover crops or terracing if it's a slopey terrain? And maybe there are other things to do, like maybe if the erosion is because of wind, maybe we can protect the land against the wind using different kinds of buffers, physical buffers, or vegetation buffers. We can also think about water. We have all this huge amount of storm water, but most of the time it ends up flushing the nutrients and the soil. Yes. So how about thinking about water harvesting systems where we can collect this water and use it for irrigation if we have some dry seasons or dry days during the year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Indiana has been suffering droughts more and more frequently. Yeah. Where usually we wouldn't have before. Having a drainage system, having maybe it's drip irrigation, which is a bit more efficient, and then or having a system like big giant water wells to collect some rainwater to use later on. That would be really helpful to help with water in general, which is essential to the farming process for sure.
Yeah, and of course we can think about so many other kinds of problems in agricultural areas, or actually design problems, not really problems, but things that we can design in agricultural areas. And we don't really have much time, so...
We could talk for hours about the problems farmers face. I'm sure they would join us.
Yeah, but I think we can just leave it here, and maybe you can think about other ideas, and maybe you can reach out to us and suggest some things that we can do as landscape architects. We are still in the theory part of it.
Yes, this is a grand idea.
Yeah, but hopefully at some point we will develop the tools and the principles and the methods to design agricultural landscapes.
In the same way that urban landscapes are really important and need to be designed, I feel that agricultural landscapes are the same.
Yeah, and I think that's our main message. So thank you so much, Amelia. It was great. Hope everyone enjoyed it.
Bye.